Okay, so last class we talked about the different levels of storage um, and the process that, like, as we form memories, the process that it goes through, the step by step. All right, how do we get something from just being in our environment to being a memory? Am I lagging right now? No? Okay, it's lagging on mine. For some reason, as soon as I start Screencastify, everything slows down. The first step is information from our environment has to come in through sensation. All right, we have a momentary split-second holding cell for all of the sensory information that comes in at any given moment. Anybody remember what the first stage of memory is called? No. The first stage before it gets to anything else, all sensory information comes into our all right. Yeah, Prerna, that's correct. Our sensory memory. Okay. Sensory memory, the split second, most of the information comes in and then it goes out as quickly as we can. And most of it is not consciously processed. Right? We unconsciously process it, but we're not consciously aware of it. Now, there are two types of sensory memory that you need to know. One involving vision lasts for about a half a second or so unless we selectively attend to it. Anybody remember what's the sensory memory for vision called? I gave you a pretty, all right, yes, iconic. Think iconic. All right. And then how about your sensory memory for hearing, for audition? Okay. If you answer questions on the chat, send it in a direct message to me. That way I can get multiple answers, have multiple people answer. But yes, it is echoic. I think an echo. Now, as I said, most of that comes in and goes out within a split second, and we're not even consciously aware of it. But if you think about the experiment that we did, the George Sperling experiment with the 12 letters. All right, and I flashed 12 letters up on the screen, and once it goes away, you were able to remember maybe 3 of them. All right, all the rest of them were unconsciously processed, but we weren't able to hold on to them. The 3 of them that you are able to hold on to then move into the next stage of memory called working memory. Working memory or short-term memory is just basically whatever we are thinking about and working with at the time. Think of working memory as essentially being like a mental scratch pad. Okay? Whether you are working through a math problem or listening to me and trying to retain what I'm saying, or thinking about how you're going to ask somebody out, or somebody asks you what your birthday is, January 29th, like blah, blah, blah. All of that is just going on in working memory, whether it's new information or you're pulling it out of your long-term memory. Once information is encoded, once information is processed through shallow processing or deep processing, it is then transferred over into long-term memory, right, with explicit memory being things like what we know and our life experiences, and then implicit memory being like things that we can do, classical conditioning, etc. Automatic, I'm not going to write on this because it, like, you can't really when I was screencastify, but automatic versus effortful. All right, anybody have any questions about that? Just a quick little review from last time. All right, so today we are going to talk about, so once information is in long-term memory, how do we get it out? Okay, once it's in that long-term storage, right? Just like a storage space is no use to you if you can't get your stuff out of it. So how do we pull information out of our memory? What is called retrieval. Let me get my PowerPoint. Retrieval and retrieval cues, which are things that help us get information out. All right. What they understand about memory now. It used to be believed that maybe different memories, this area of your brain stored your memories of childhood, this area of your brain stored your memory of what type of animal you like the best, this area of your brain stored, what foods you like, blah, blah, blah. What they understand now is that rather than that, memories are stored in a web of associations. Web of associations, meaning when we form memories, all right. Let's say that we are having a new experience, all right, we form a memory of that experience by comparing it or going back to prior experience. New memories are formed in the context of prior experience. We try to link new information with stuff that we already know. So we could say there that forming memories, when we form memories like this, what are we using? What is, if memories are formed by using prior experience, what is that an example of? All right, it is we form memories in the same way that we form schemas, but then even broader than that. When we make judgments and whatnot based off of prior experience, what is that called? Most important term of the class. It's more broad than stereotypes. Stereotypes is an example of this. We talked about it in Unit 3. Yes, Avanti, that's correct. Eric, that's correct. All right, Tarv, that's correct. Anybody else? Okay. I guess it is a type of associative learning, yeah. Okay. All right. Perceptual set is, it's top-down processing. All right. Memories, for the most part, are formed by using top-down processing, by comparing it to prior experience. This way of linking memories by meaning is what is called, and I don't think you'd be asked about this because this is a pretty new, this isn't even in the new textbook, but it's called semantic network theory. Semantic meaning, we link memories together by meaning. But this is why, are any of you the type of storyteller that, like, you're telling a story and then you're like, oh shit, and that makes me think of this, and then this, and your story just goes off on like a tangent with like talking about something totally, I'm like that, like some of that, because I'm so ADD. But yeah, this is why, like, one memory makes you think of, when you think of one thing, it makes you think of something else, which makes you think of something else, because they are all linked. All right, all these neurons communicate with each other. Okay. All right. Any questions there? All right. So on this next slide, I'm going to flash a picture up there real quick. And just as soon as I flash it up there, I want you to send me a private message, a direct message telling me what was the first thing that you saw in the picture. Okay, don't sit there and think about it, whatnot. I just want you to, what was the first thing that you saw? All right, so be ready to type something. All right, everybody ready? Nope, never mind. That'll be here in a sec. I forgot about this slide. Okay, all right, just a little review. All right, recall. Recall is when we just have to we have to retrieve information without any memory cues, like a essay. I don't know. I don't know if fill in the blank would be or not, because there are, like, you can use context with that. So I'm not sure. And then recognition is when we just have to choose whatever answer out of a list of potential answers, like a multiple choice test. So we do have what are called retrieval cues here. All right, but that should be review. All right, now, gonna flash a picture up there. Just want you to type in the chat box to me, not public, but to me, what is the first thing that you see? All right, everybody ready? All right, what was the first thing that you saw? All right, how about the Maddie? I mean, like the whole thing. Okay, yeah. Okay. All right, so it looks like, all right, so it looks like the first thing that people saw here is a duck. All right. Why might the vast majority of you, even though this is an optical illusion, it's called a duck rabbit, all right, because you can either see a duck or a rabbit. All right, but why might the majority of you all see a duck first? Anybody have a guess? Damn it, we're supposed to get to that point after people throw out wrong answers. No, you're fine. So we look from left to right. We actually, when we look at pictures, we read from left to right, but when we look at pictures, we actually look at the whole of the picture first. We don't necessarily look at it from left to right. We look at, that's what Gestalt is. We look and see the whole and make an interpretation based off of that. But as Aiden said, right, at the beginning of class, as I started talking about this, I just put up a picture of some ducks, right? And a lot of you all probably saw it, but it didn't even, you're just like, all right, there's ducks right there. I don't know. I don't care why they're ducks. They're just ducks there. You didn't even think about it. All right. And then you forgot about it. Okay. Probably right after because it didn't have any meaning. All right. If I put rabbits, yes, you would have seen rabbits. I've done this both ways. Okay. And it works both ways. What I did right there is essentially I did a little bit of mind control on you, all right, to get you to answer question the way that I wanted you to. Did what is called one of the main ways that we retrieve memories is what is called is through what's called priming. Okay, priming is the activation of oftentimes unconscious. We don't necessarily realize that it's happening of unconscious associations in memory. The vast majority of you all saw a duck there first, and you just said like, oh, I saw a duck. You probably didn't think to yourself, oh, I must have seen a duck because there was a picture of ducks at the beginning of the unit, right? You didn't probably consciously make that association, but it's an association that deeper, darker, deeper unconscious levels of your mind made. I primed you to answer that in a certain way. Priming is oftentimes referred to as memoryless. It's a hard word to say, memory, because it's implicit, meaning it's automatic and we don't necessarily realize that we are doing it. They found that they did a study a while ago with people buying wine, and they found that in a wine store when they would play German music, I don't really know what German music is. I guess like polka, or I don't know who's the conductor The Flight of the Valkyrie, the guy that all the Nazis really liked. I can't remember what his name is. Well, they found that when they played German music in a wine store, people were more likely to buy German wine. And when they played French music, they were more likely to buy French wine. Now, the person didn't sit there and think probably, oh, I like this German music. I should get a bottle of German wine. Right? But there may have been some priming there as well. Things like games like Wheel of Fortune and Hangman are what are called masked priming, which is where we unconsciously associate a certain word with certain letters that we see. There's a really, really bad South Park scene in one episode that deals with this. So can anybody think of any other examples of priming? We've actually talked about this before. We've just called it a different name. Yeah, yeah. A lot of times, this is going on the idea that like, you know, we like to think that we are like making our own choices and our own judgments about things, but a lot of times they're a little like think of like the movie Inception. Like that's basically priming. Have you all seen Inception? Yeah. All right. Good. That's a great movie. A lot of times, those little ideas that we think are our own have actually been kind of put in there without us realizing it. Now we've kind of called this a different name in Unit 3. What's it called when we do something that influences us, but it falls below our conscious awareness? We talked about it in terms of like advertising. Sorry, Taylor? Subliminal. Yep. Priming, basically, subliminal messages are a version of priming. Okay. Anybody got any questions about that? All right. Now, with memory, not only does priming play a big role, but context plays a big role in what we are able to remember as well. Now, who can tell what is context? If your English teacher asks you to use context clues, or your history teacher asks you what's the context of an event that happens, what does that mean? All right, the factors that play into it, yeah, but what else is context? All right, like the specific situation, kind of, yeah. We can even get broader than that. The surroundings. What is going the environment? What is going on around you? And memory retrieval, what we remember a lot of times is dependent upon the context that we are in, right? Context dependent memory. I remember psychological stuff much better when I'm in a classroom rather than like if I'm like out at a bar, okay? Because I teach it in a classroom or in my living room, okay? Memory, what we remember is heavily dependent upon the environment that we are in. And certain environments can trigger certain memories. Think about when you go somewhere that you've never been before, but the place is like, oh, you're like, oh shit, this place reminds me of this place. Context dependent memory. They did a study where they had people memorize a list of words while scuba diving or while above water. And you think like, all right, why does anybody need to learn a list of words underwater? Well, it's an experiment. Okay. And they found that afterwards, their recall of the words, the people who learned it better underwater, all of these are types of retrieval cues. Yeah. The people who learned it underwater remembered it better underwater. And the people who learned it above water remembered it better above water. Okay, because of the context in which they had learned it. This is called the encoding specificity principle, which is where we remember things the best when we're in the environment where we learn them. And when we're out of that environment, it can be harder to retrieve memories. For instance, has anybody ever ran into a teacher outside of school? Yes, no, yeah. Is it weird? You look at it and you're like, whoa, do I have to call Miss Brooks to like go get the net, get the teacher back into their natural habitat? They shouldn't be. They shouldn't be at DB's Tavern, right? Yeah, it's and it did anybody who's had this happen before, did it take you a second to recognize the person, to recognize that it was your teacher? Yeah, I've had this happen before. Well, I've had it happen on both sides. I don't really hang out in Valentine a whole lot because I don't live here. But like back before the pandemic, me and a group of a lot of teachers would go to DBs on Fridays, and every once in a while, a student would come in and like look at us, be like, "Whoa, there's like 10 archery Kell teachers right there, all drinking beer. Like, what's going on?" But I just ran it. I saw a student once in Target, and I like waved to them, and they like looked at me like, "Who in the hell is this person waving?" And then they realized. But just a couple months ago, me and Coach Green were backpacking in the Grayson Highlands on the Appalachian Trail up in Virginia, and there was a group of people, like a family, that stopped us to see if we could take a picture of them. And we were like, sure. And we were chatting with them. And it took all of us like a minute or so. There was a teenage boy with them. And it took all of us like a minute or so to realize that like both of us had taught the kid. And it took him a while to realize that he was talking to two of his former teachers. It was Gavin Little. And because like it's so unlikely to us that you would be running into two teachers on the Appalachian Trail up in Virginia, that the environment that we were in, like it just took a little while for it to sink to us to make the connection. Um, who in here has ever had the thing happen where you're in one room and you're like, oh, I got to go into this room and get this thing, and you go into the room and you're like, why the hell am I in here? All right. Yeah. Anybody know what's the best way to remember why you went into that room? Good. Go back into the other room because that was the context in which you were thinking about it. Okay. All right. So context dependent memory, one of the ways that we retrieve memories. Are there any questions about this? Some people say that if you chew the same flavor of gum while you're studying, there's a little bit of truth to the gum thing. That is more so the next one, though, what's called state-dependent memory. Now, similar to context-dependent memory, not only does the environment that we are in play a role, but the mindset that we are in when we learn something plays a role in our ability to be able to learn it. When we learn something in a certain state of mind, we actually retrieve it better when we are in that state of mind again. For instance, if you learn something while you're tired, we actually retrieve it slightly better when we're tired, because it was the content, it's the state of mind that we learned it in. Now, I mean, I'll give you another example, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but it's true, and they've done research on this. Let's say that tomorrow night you get rip roaring drunk and you Uber home, and you get home, you blacked out, and you put your keys somewhere, and you wake up in the morning and you're like, where the hell did I put my keys? What happened last night? And where did I put my keys? You can't find them anywhere. Anybody know what the best way to remember where you put your keys would be get drunk again. Yes. And this is completely serious. Now, it's not a recall. They found that when you learn something when you're drunk, your recall of it is slightly better drunk than sober. Okay. And that's what we mean by state of mind. They've associated this with, like, if you're studying and you're like, you're hitting your vape the whole time, you're actually probably going to do better on the test if you hit your vape, you're vaping your face off while you take the test. Okay. Same thing with, like, if you learn something when you take Adderall, you remember it better on Adderall. If you learn something in pain, we actually remember it better when we're in pain again, when we're tired, when we're scared, when we're happy, whatnot. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah. One type of state dependent memory is what is called mood congruent memory. Mood congruent memory is when we are in a certain mood, we tend to remember other times when we were in that mood. So when we're happy, we tend to remember other times when we were happy. When we're sad, we tend to remember other times that we were sad. Now, has anybody ever had this happen where your mom maybe asked you to do the dishes before she got home from work and you forgot to, and she gets home from work and she's like, damn it, I asked you to do the dishes and you didn't do them, and this really makes me mad, and last week you did this thing that really pissed me off, and 2 weeks ago you did this thing that pissed me off, and a month ago you did this, and blah blah, and all of a sudden it's just like a shitstorm of everything that you've ever done wrong. Anybody ever had that happen before? Okay. Yeah. All right. That's mood congruent memory. All right. When we're mad, think about, like, when you get mad about something, you go up to your room and you're just like stewing, and all of a sudden you go to, like, this other time that, like, something totally unrelated that pissed you off, and you just get madder and madder and madder. Okay. Mood congruent memory. All right. Anybody have any questions about that? Anybody have any other examples they can think of? No. All right. Um, this is not in your textbook, so I don't think you'd ever be asked about this, but it's interesting. And so, so oftentimes the way that we retrieve information, sometimes our memories, and we'll talk more about this next class. I should actually probably put this in that part. Um, a lot of times the way that we think about our memories, it has been altered from the reality of the memories. One of the ways that this happens is what's called rosy retrospection, which is the idea that, like, we look at the past more favorably than we did when it was the present. So people are always like, oh, those were the good old days. Like, people are like, the 90s, those were the good old days. Okay. And the 90s were kind of nice. The biggest political scandal we had was between Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office. But when people have, like, nostalgia for the good old days, a lot of times our memories of the good old days have been altered a little bit, and maybe they weren't as great as we remember them. But this is the idea that, like, the phrase that goes with this is we look at the past through rose-colored glasses, meaning we look at the past more favorably. And an example of this, guys, is, has anybody in here ever gotten, like, at the beginning of quarantine? Yes, that's a great example. I actually said to one of my friends the other day, kind of like, the beginning of quarantine was, like, not that bad, when, like, everything was just kind of shut down, and, like, and anytime you did anything, saw anybody, it was like, oh, this is exciting. All right, when in reality, like, the beginning of quarantine was like, you're like, what in the hell is going on? Like, it was not fun. I didn't see any friends for, like, only people I saw for like 2.5 months were my parents. I went down to their house for the beginning of it. Um, but yeah, like, has anybody ever gotten back together with an ex before? Yeah. All right. Did it work out? No. Does it ever work out? Yeah, this is, again, this AP site, like dating advice from somebody you probably shouldn't take dating advice from. But yeah, but a lot of time, like you break up, and like 2 months later, you get a text message like, "Hey, babe, I miss you," and you're like, "You know what? I kind of miss them too." Like, blah blah blah. Maybe we can work this out. Things actually weren't as bad as I thought. Then you get back together, and then like 2 weeks later, you're like, "Ah, shit, this is why we broke up." Yeah. Okay. All right. So, any questions on that? I'm gonna write down that example. That's a really good. All right. Last thing, almost done. So a little bit, let's get back into a little bit of history. If I were to ask you to name the presidents in order and then graph out what you think it would look like with if you made a graph of the presidents that we remember in order, what would that graph look like? Let's see what we can do. All right, who's number one? George Washington. Who's number two? No, John Adams. That's like one of those like Mandela effects things where like people think that we just think of Thomas Jefferson as being the second, just like we think of Alexander Hamilton as being a president. All right, yep, it's John Adams. Thomas Jefferson was three. All right, who's number four? James Madison. All right, maybe some of you all are singing the Animaniacs song in your head now. All right, who's number five? Monroe. Yep, the nickname was the shriveled little apple because he was like 5'1". He weighed like 95 pounds and he was really weird looking. Okay. All right. So five was Monroe. Who's number six? John Quincy Adams. About seven. Andrew Jackson. All right. And then probably after that, like you fall off a little bit each time. Some of you are probably like, who the hell is James Monroe? Never heard that name. But then after Jackson, who was without looking it up, who was after Jackson? Van Buren, yeah. And then after that, it gets like I have a hard time keeping those ones. William Henry Harrison, who was only president for what, like 90 days, I think, and he died. He was the one who died of pneumonia, I believe. All of those. Now, so it would be kind of like this. It'd fall off a lot. Now, if we go backwards, all right, obviously Donald Trump's president right now. All right, who was before Trump? Obama. Who was before Obama? George George W. Bush. Who was before Bush? Clinton. How about before Clinton? Bush Senior. HW. How about before that? Reagan. What about before Reagan? Carter. Yeah, somebody looking it up. All right. Well, what about before Reagan? People always. This guy was not actually elected president. Ford. Yeah. Why was he not elected? Why was he not ever elected president? He was Nixon's vice president. Yeah. And when Nixon resigned, Ford took over. So if we graphed it out, it would look we remember stuff in the beginning and the end, right? But the whole middle is a little bit muddled up. It would look something like this, right? This is what is called the serial positioning effect. All right. We have a tendency to remember when we have a list or a length of time, we tend to remember the beginning, what is called primacy, or the primacy effect, and the end, what is called the recency effect. Okay? These are both, all of this is the serial position effect. We tend to remember, when we have a list, we remember the beginning and the end, but the middle is not so much. Okay, that's why, if I want you to really remember something in class, I'm going to tell you it either at the beginning of class or at the end of class. Okay, if I tell you in the middle, then chances are you're going to forget. Now, sometimes things in the middle we do remember. So if we're looking at this graph of the recall of American presidents, we have a couple of spikes here in the middle. What might this spike right here be? Yeah, probably Abraham Lincoln. And then maybe just with context effects, you remember James Buchanan and Andrew Johnson. And then who would this spike probably be? By JFK. All right, with and then you have like FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and then JFK. Why do those guys stick out, even though they are in the middle? Taylor, I can't hear you. All right. They were president during relatively significant times, and they had some big stuff happen to them. Abraham Lincoln, president during the Civil War. In my opinion, and I believe it's the correct opinion, the greatest president that we ever had. Okay, and then he's also assassinated. Right, and then JFK, maybe not the greatest president in the world, but he was unique in that he was young, he was good looking, he was sleeping with Marilyn Monroe, he had the Bay of Pigs incident, and all these things. When stuff is unique and it's in the middle, it stands out. This is what is called the von Restorff effect, which is uniqueness makes things that are in the middle stand out. I doubt you'd ever be asked about the von Restorff effect, but you could be. Okay. All right, guys. Anybody got any questions about any of that? Okay. Well, on Tuesday, we're going to talk about false memories. Why a good amount of your memories might actually not be accurate at all. And we'll also talk about why we forget. What are some of the reasons that we forget about things? All right. If you have any questions about anything,